Okay. So what's going on? We'll probably talk it a little bit. So I've been hearing all around that AGI is near, that we've got the right ingredients, and that it's right around the corner. And I don't know. What are you thinking?
It's a great question. This is a conversation I have a lot because when I talk to my AI friends and even some of my human friends, the conversations that I have really focus on the idea that there's a couple of core ideas that now that we have them, it's imminent. And I don't know, I'm super skeptical about this. So one of the things I've heard is that, attention is all you need. And this is a problem for me because I have an attention deficit. So I don't know how I'm ever going to become super intelligent. But is that really the whole story? That doesn't really feel like the whole story. So maybe scale, and you just keep putting more and more into it. That's all you need, and everything's going to come out of that. And that doesn't really feel right, especially in computer science. We learned very early on that you want to think about scaling as something you want to do efficiently, not like every time you want to do a little better on a test, double the amount of data that it takes to solve it. But maybe, I don't know, reward is enough? I heard that from somebody who I trust. I don't know. I mean, it seems like something's still missing. I worry sometimes that the computer scientists have a tendency to kind of cartoonify the world and then solve the problem in the cartoon world and forget that wasn't the original problem. And so, I don't know. I mean, I kind of put it back to you. Like, what do you think? What do you think we might be falling short on?
Well, I mean, something I think a lot about is development, the development of natural intelligence. And development has a lot of structure to it. So the brain develops in sequential and temporally sequenced sensitive periods, where the wiring up of specific circuits is sensitive to particular kinds of environmental information. And this development is instructed by the statistics of the environment. So you get information from the visual system about the nature of the objects, the types of sounds, and visual cortex, auditory cortex will form these low-level representations based on the information that's present, effectively like fitting the abilities of the organism to the data that's present in the environment. And this is hierarchical. So these low-level representations are used by higher-level representations like control processes, like attention and memory. This fit, this ability to fit behavior to the environment seems really critical. And
somebody like me up
against the bodies. Anyway, keep going. The developing body also really structures and organizes this curriculum for learning. So babies are small, and if an adult is looking at a visual scene, the baby also is often looking at it from a different perspective. And Linda Smith has done this beautiful work where she puts head-mounted cameras on babies and is recording. Yeah. And so you can see what is it the baby sees. And it turns out, we know that during infancy, when visual cortex is forming, low-level edge orientation, selective edge representations, lo and behold, what the babies see when you look at the statistics of their visual environment is that they get sparser edges. They get few edges and few orientations relative to what you see in the adult view. So it's like data that is well suited for the system that needs to be tuned. Babies are born with low contrast sensitivity. This basically means they're taking in information as though it's been low pass filtered, blurry. And it turns out, if you low pass filter images and train a convolutional neural net on those images to identify basic category representations, it turns out it does better. It may be that there's value in this sort of gradual development of visual acuity because it renders this dog and that dog, and sort of takes away the fine grained details, renders them more similar, may facilitate this kind of.
So this is different, I think, than the way that some people are training these large models, where they just give it all the data and it's all produced, just like work it out.
Yeah. So this, this, you need this kind of structured temporal information to do something smart with it.
Yeah. No, that reminds me of something that's on the next slide.
Let's see that.
So thinking about reinforcement learning, the way that we can solve problems in reinforcement learning, we know there's some nice results, like from Crimson saying, that show that we can. It's provable that you can learn efficiently. So given our reinforcement learning agent in an environment, it can learn to nearly optimize reward in a reasonable amount of time. Economy of time with respect to a whole bunch of important parameters. But that's really different from this sort of structural data that you're talking about, in the sense that the data is not presented not in phases, and not only not all at once, but through the control of the agent. And so it's an interesting question, like, do you actually need, could you just learn from the data itself? And so one of the things, that one way to formalize this is to sort of say, okay, what if you just collected a whole lot of data and then gave it to some kind of reinforcement learning algorithm? Could it behave near optimally just from the data? And the answer is, well, it depends. So it depends on how you collect that data. If you collect the data using some data collection policy pi, you let it run around in the environment for some reasonable amount of time, and then you store all that data and give it to another agent to try to figure out, okay, how can I extract information from this data set to optimize reward? Well, if that pi is just some arbitrary pi, like a pi, like I want to learn how to get around in the world, and the data collection policy doesn't actually get around in the world, it just falls on the ground, it's not going to generate useful data. That's not going to be data that's sufficient for learning how to behave near optimally. Okay, well, what if instead we use the optimal policy for that environment? Well, sure, actually that turns out to be enough. If you know in advance how to solve the problem, you can collect data with that solution. That data is enough to actually learn from it. Then you already need to know what the problem is to that point. You have to even know what the task is. Well, okay, so if you don't know that, maybe you can just explore uniformly, just take action uniformly as you work through the environment. That works, but it could require an exponential amount of data. So you might have to double the data every time you want to get just a little bit better at this.
Seems like a problem.
That seems, well, I mean, I think computational complexity is real. I think some people don't seem to believe that anymore, but I believe in the core of my meeting that that's actually an important constraint. It turns out, and I gave a version of these slides to some theoreticians at one point, and they're like, you know, there is a policy that you can actually define for any policy. So given in the environment, you can define a policy that collects data in a way that will be sufficient for any possible reward function. But that policy has to know what the transition dynamics of the environment is. To define that policy if you know how the environment is. So basically, if you don't know things about the environment, the answer is basically no. Like just static collecting of data is not going to be enough. Well, but let me say some more. So in the process of kind of thinking this through, I ran across this paper by Ostrowski et al. In 2001 that I just think is really, really neat. So if you haven't heard about this, I really want you to know about this.
Tell me.
Sure. So the basic idea is that you've got, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to run a reinforcement learning algorithm in an Atari video game because, you know, that's a problem we know how to solve. So
All I did growing up.
What's that?
It's what I spent many hours doing growing up.
Same. So you have the Atari video game learner, and it's learning, and all the data, all the interactions are being collected, and then given to a second learner. All right, so the second learner is basically tethered to the first learner. It doesn't get to make choices, but it sees the same data that the first learner learns from. And that first learner, it's enough data for it to do well in the task. And so you can try it on Breakout, Pong, Space Invader, CQuest, whatever it happens to be. For at least 3 of these, okay, so then you give that data to well, you all along, you're giving that data to the second learner. And then you cut out the first learner and you say, second learner, now it's your turn. The joystick is yours, right? You see exactly the same data that I have. I've mastered the task. How well do you do? And the answer is not well. Right? The blue line here is representing what's happening to that passive second learner. The only difference, they've seen the same data. The only difference is the data was collected with respect to the decisions and choices of the first agent instead of the second agent. And I think that's just super cool, right? There's a notion that it really helps to be engaged in the data collection process, right? I'm learning about the world by acting in the world. You can see the same things that I saw, but if one wasn't your actions, you might not do as well. I'm worried that that might be really specific to these agents in the sense that that I think what's really happening here is the second agent has a different representation of the value function and the policy, and we're not teaching it that the things that it thinks are good are actually good because it's not the one that's actually trying it. So I don't know how you could possibly even imagine doing this with natural agents, but at least in the artificial setting, it's fairly well understood. So is active learning actually necessary?
Well, yes, definitely. So that study reminds me of a really classic study in which kittens were placed in a carousel. Sort of strange, but this rotates around, and this kitten here can walk. And during this period, these are newborn kittens where they're forming their visual cortex is sensitive to orientation selective information. And this animal is getting visual input that's driven by its emotion. But this animal is in what they call a gondola. And it's getting moved around and carried around by the other kittens. And as it turns out, motion-initiated sensory feedback is really critical even for the development of low-level sensory representation. So the kitten that's being moved around and getting visual stimulation passively in the gondola, if the experimenter takes it and says, here, step onto this platform, it can't use visual information to initiate a motor action and step onto it. If you place it on a visual cliff where one side is shadows go down and the other side is steep, the passive kittens will randomly go down the shadow or the steep side. The active kittens all take the shadow side and go down safely. But
so again, same data, but they're actually
same data.
The one that actively generated that data is able to walk, and the other one is a very unfortunate kid.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Sorry.
The hockey story is that the ability, they're still in a sensitive period, so the ability comes back to let the kid move around after that. No kittens were around. So in terms of generating your own data is really critical for other higher level cognitive abilities. So this was a task that was used where participants are seeing these objects that are hidden underneath through an aperture, and they basically get to select what it is they see at different times. And so in the active condition, you're able to control the timing or the sequence or the spacing between these study observations. And in various control conditions, you have less degree of control, and you're basically yoked to the observations. And your memory is better if you're controlling what it is that you can see. Similarly, if you need to classify these circles that have a different radius and align with a different orientation according to these different types of AV classification response rules, if you're able to generate the observations that you need to classify, basically, test a hypothesis, you do better at learning these categories than if you are just passively learning from the classifications of the exemplars that are provided.
So in this case, it's sometimes just helpful to see the boundary cases, for example, right? Which maybe spontaneously won't get generated.
Right.
If you pick one, you can help.
I can create a stimulus where I think the boundary might be. And this kind of directed exploration is really critical for learning because it lets me test hypotheses that the current hypotheses that I have right now. It lets me study material based on my own metacognitive uncertainty about how well I know it. And it's particularly important for causal learning. So, for example, these two causal structures are drawn from a Markov equivalence class. So if you see X, you'll see X, Y, and Z in both cases, but you won't be able to discern which causal structure is the true underlying causal structure unless you intervene on X and Y and see what the difference is in the causal consequences. And we've shown in work in my lab that even young children can learn causal structures through intervention effectively. So this is critical for building world models, this ability to actively generate observations that provide information. But I don't know, is that what's missing? Active learning?
That seems helpful. We have some work from my lab where we looked at learning again, and specifically the sort of question of, we know that we can learn in time that's by interaction, right? By actually having this active engagement during the learning process, we can learn in time that's polynomial in the number of states. That's the interesting result that I mentioned earlier. But the problem is the number of states is huge in the world, right? And so that's like polynomial in huge is still not good. So we looked at a model that we created that we call quick learning. The notion is that you should be able to have some hypothesis class, and you should be able to control. What's that?
Clever name.
Oh, thank you very much. I named it after a convenience store near me. And the notion is that the system, while it's something, knows what it knows what it's uncertain about. It has you had a great phrase, though, metacognitive uncertainty. Was that it? Yeah. All right. So, at least I think that's what you call it. And what that allows you to have is the notion of being able to specify which classes of models you can actually learn interactively, actively with, and which ones you can't. And that could include, of course, tabular models where all the states are their own thing, but it also includes more sophisticated models where the states relate to each other in various ways. And one that we experimented with was states that are represented in terms of a set of objects. So the set of objects, as long as those objects have kind of minimal interactions, you can still efficiently learn that class. So, like the taxi problem, certain Atari video games, as long as you can kind of break the world up into objects that don't influence each other in an unbounded number of ways. But the way that these systems work is to guarantee that they're going to be near optimal, they kind of have to act very conservatively. They sort of have to try everything. And that's really where the problem comes in. That's why, in a sense, active alone, I don't think it's going to be enough. Because active gets you a lot farther than passive. But there's still something missing. The world is way more complicated than that. Even knowing what kinds of models are appropriate, you just don't know. You can't guess that. You kind of have to try everything. So that seems problematic. Oh, we can go backwards. I think
maybe.
No, I have more to say.
Yeah.
I wanted so I left it as I think maybe active learning is not enough, but I do have a suggestion, something that actually will be able to help, and that is having a teacher, a friendly and helpful teacher. Yeah. So we can show that you can get a provably larger class of more models that are learnable as long as you have access to a teacher. So the reason for this turned out to be that the learner could take much more risky kind of assumptions, right? So instead of having to try everything and find out if something is true or not, the learner can make an assumption. Well, I think this is true, and can start to act on that with the belief or the hope or the aspiration that the teacher will intervene if that actually is preventing the learner from getting to something optimal. This can allow learning to be exponentially faster for certain kinds of classes of models. So, but the thing about these models that I think is interesting, I'll kind of put the question back to you, is that the teachers, first of all, the teachers in our theoretical models they know the right answer. They know all the answers. And second of all, so that makes them kind of a different class. They're like these knowledgeable teachers that are kind of above it all. And then there's a learner that's trying to learn from those teachers. But in the natural world, we're all just organisms, right? So people, like adults, people are people, and baby people are people. And so what do we know about whether or not something like that could even work in the setting of like a natural set?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there are examples across species of a kind of biological receptivity to teaching. There's this phenomenon that's known as imprinting, also develops during a sensitive period in many bird species lifespan, where a bird will, during a sensitive period, attach themselves and follow around any organism that exhibits the sort of movement and sound properties that a species select for. And this can either be its parent under normal conditions or a Conrad Lorenz under atypical conditions. So it suggests that there could be this sort of evolutionary receptivity to teaching, or at least to demonstration. But this is really important, as you said. This prevents these chicks from trying everything. Following a parent involves protection from bad outcomes, but also facilitates learning from observation. If there's one knowledgeable agent that is demonstrating actions for them, then there's opportunity to sort of develop its action repertoire through this sort of demonstration. And I think teaching in humans has interesting kind of pragmatics to it. So there's a phenomenon that's referred to as over-imitation. And in over-imitation, but basically, the pragmatics are that if you're showing me something, I'm making an assumption that you are giving me the kind of causally parsimonious way of performing that action. And in over-imitation...
That's different than just watching you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you're demonstrating, if there's some inference...
Okay, all right.
Well, if...
All right, I see. We just
If I'm, give me that clicker,
Fair enough.
So there's a communicative intent to the gesture. And it's been demonstrated that when you show an action, when the teacher shows an action to another child, adults will over imitate, that they'll reproduce even aspects of that demonstration that are causally irrelevant. So here's an example. Okay, that's weird. That's kind of weird. What's she doing? Yeah. And then, oh, it's open. Okay. So if you show that to children, they will faithfully reproduce those parts of the action that don't seem to have any causal efficacy.
I see. Children are dumb? Is that what you're saying? A little bit, okay.
It's pragmatic, so really strong, these assumptions of sort of causal parsimony from teachers. If you do that with bonobos or chimpanzees, they don't. They
just go right
through their own actions. Yeah, they open it up and they get the grip. So there's something that is uniquely human about this prioritization of the information that you're getting from teachers. And in this way, teaching is sort of a double-edged sword. It can also constrain exploration. There's a really beautiful study that shows if you take a toy, like some weird device that has lots of potential functions, and a teacher demonstrates one function of that toy to a group of children, those children will fail to discover the other functions because assuming that was what it's for, whereas other kids who freely explore will discover more. And then there's this idea that I really like from sort of classic developmental psychology. It's a term that is referred to as the zone of proximal development, but it's basically it's what a person can't do on their own, but what they can do with the assistance from a teacher. And that's because teachers in the environment, knowledgeable others, scaffold our abilities. If you're teaching a kid how to tie a shoe, you say, make this
bunny ears.
Bunny ears, yeah. And even if you're not doing it for them, you're giving partial cues, prompts, hints that extend out the capacity of what they can do. And why it's called scaffolding is that through this sort of prompted retrieval of knowledge or narrating through a sequence, you get them into that zone, and then you can take the scaffolding away, and now it's things they can do.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to have a name for that, because we did some work in my lab that kind of leveraged that idea. In the content, we called it impact learning, iteratively moderated PAC teaching. PAC stands for probably approximately correct. Not important right now. The important thing is the notion that we are going to, instead of having to learn a concept all in one go with all the data all at once, we have zone of proximal development. We have a notion that there's certain sub-problems that are important to learn that are easy to learn from the base level, like the beginning point. And once it's learned those, it can actually take advantage of those to learn more sophisticated things. Yeah. So what was once an inference, once the teacher has shown that it's actually important, becomes another primitive in the set.
Yeah.
And that allows the set of primitives to expand. You can actually satisfy a lot more information, or a lot more other tasks can actually be learned that way. So the teacher is exposing the learner to simple and then complex tasks, building up a repertoire of solutions as they go. And we were able to show that simple learners can efficiently acquire tasks of actually unbounded complexity. So not just polynomial in the size of the class, but like the class is infinitely large and we can learn it in finite time. So that is a huge advantage. We looked at this in the context of teaching a robot to carry out tasks in a grid world. We did it with a real robot too, clear. But grid worlds. We wanted to teach him to satisfy these temporal logic expressions. So one of them was, how did you do that?
The red one, yeah.
Yeah, okay, right. So this is a temporal logic expression that means always eventually reach the table and then eventually reach the fridge. So what this is temporal logic expression for go back and forth between the table and the fridge. And teaching the robot to do that with human feedback was just hard. The space of possibilities is too large. So instead, we have an algorithm. First we teach it, go to the table. That's not so hard. There's only a small number of things that it can actually do. Then we teach it, okay, go to the fridge. Those are important sub-concepts. Then, once it has these in its vocabulary, teaching it to basically go from the table to the fridge is a much simpler task.
Yeah.
And once that's taught, then repeating that is a very, very simple thing. So it's always very simple combinations of existing subroutines. And yeah, that makes a really big difference. But I feel like that doesn't really get at the main issue. That feels like an aside to me. Well, no, it doesn't. What it feels like to me is the notion that that's the thing about, kind of concrete conversation. You don't know which direction it's going to go. And so you look at the slides and then you know which direction the conversation is going. So then I feel like just to kind of take a step back, the stuff that we've talked about so far is that one of the things that's different between, I think, the way that a lot of people are building these big complicated systems today and the way that at least natural systems seem to work and achieve some level of intelligence is that the data collection itself is a lot more complicated for us, right? That there's activeness to it, there's the ability to explore, there's the ability to teach, right? That someone can actually watch you behave and giving you additional feedback based on that. So of the various things that on the first slide we talked about as maybe this is enough, the one that we didn't really talk about is reward. So reward seems to be the thread that actually connects all these things together. Maybe that's where things are really simple.
So simple, reward, and enough. Well, so I think the human reward function is actually not super simple. Do you like cake?
I do like cake.
Why would this be rewarding?
Because it's tasty.
Okay, so there's a formal distinction of what are the properties of reward that's been made by neuroscientist Ken Barrett, where this distinction is drawn between liking, kind of hedonic, tastes delicious, hedonic properties of a reward, and wanting, the sort of motivational properties that drive learning and the actions that are guided toward obtaining that reward. And while you think these things would normally go hand in hand, and often they do, like cake, they're dissociable. They're supported by distinct underlying neural systems in the brain, and under odd conditions, they become behaviorally dissociated. So, for example, you can experimentally manipulate mice to knock out their sweet taste receptors and then give them a sucrose solution.
There's something slightly cool about people.
Kittens and carousels.
And babies with cameras on their head, sure. Mice that want to taste delicious things.
Science. And these sweet blind mice, they don't show any of the responses to the delivery of sucrose water that suggests that they like it. They don't show activation within the neural systems that drive liking, but they will work for it. It's reinforcing, right? So then the question is, what's going on? It turns out that ingesting sucrose solution in sweet blind mice, or just directly putting sucrose solution into the digestive system of mice who can taste sweet water they will work more. It engages the dopaminergic circuitry that's important for driving the wanting and the reinforcement learning. So the liking isn't necessarily for learning. The liking seems to be serving some other kind of function, which is sort of shaping the organism. It's not critical for the reinforcement process, but it's giving you your perception of the flavor, the taste. It's giving you a forecast of what is to come. And it emphasizes.
Hustled off the stage a little bit.
Are we at 40?
I deducted time from each other. Due to the
because the technical issues.
Oh, okay. We'll go really, really fast. So it suggests that our rewards are internally grounded, that they're dependent on interoceptive state, and this is consistent with what economists call diminishing marginal utility. If I'm thirsty, I drink one glass of water, reward X. If I drink 2, 3, 4, 5, less rewarding. It becomes aversive. And it suggests that more isn't better. that reward has this sort of homeostatic property, that we need to be in the right zone. And this has been shown in a really beautiful study in the Rebecca Sachs' lab, where participants were deprived of food or social contact for 10 hours. Their craving for these stimuli that they're deprived of increases over that time. You put them in the scanner and you show them either food cues or cues of social scenes, and their midbrain shows larger responses to the thing they've been deprived of. So there's this physiological kind of drive progression tendency, but this seems really to be a property of biological organisms. So I don't know, is this even relevant computationally?
I think so. I think it's actually really interesting, and I would have a lot to say about this under other circumstances. Something about saving the world from food effects. But I've been thinking about this in the context of maybe the kind of rewards that we tend to optimize, or that we can think about in RL, about optimizing and striving and moving forward. Like maybe we should think about some homeostasis rewards. Like if you want a thermostat to keep you comfortable, it's not about making you like super hot or super cold. It's about being in that right zone, the zone of approximate comfort.
Yeah.
So that's not phase. And so it turns out I feel like reinforcement learning people would be computational reinforcement learning people maybe wouldn't want to go that way because we have this nice theory about reward optimization, but there is a nice theory of actually comfort too, called Blackwell's approachability, where rewards are vectors and the environment can be stochastic, unknown, or adversarial, and the algorithms are about trying to ensure that the average reward goes within that target zone. And I feel like that could be a really interesting thing for us to explore in the field. But that's kind of an aside, and how does that actually link to higher notions of intelligence?
Well, I think, we can also generate arbitrary states that are imbued with reward. We can create goals for ourselves. Kids do this all the time when they play. I'm going to stack blocks into a really high tower. And those goals can be temporally visceral. They can be abstract. My goal could be, a goal could be to write a paper, to solve a scientific problem, to get tenure. And what's helpful for these visceral rewards, where there's very sparse reinforcement along the way, is that they're scaffolded by intrinsic rewards that seem to be useful for kind of directing action in the right direction, like sensing situations in which you have causal force or your actions are effective, the reward value of making progress or the learning, curiosity. And it suggests that beyond these this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, old school social psychology, but maybe there's something to it, that beyond these deficiency needs, there are these, the reward system is scaffolding growth, and maybe there's a hierarchy where when the physiological needs are satisfied, there's kind of a drive to pursue these higher levels.
Oh, I love that idea. And I think that maybe for reinforcement learning researchers, there's a similar hierarchy that you can think about, where at the bottom, there's why do we do research? Well, to earn a living, but maybe also to stay funded. Maybe for reputation, kind of a higher order thing, or have you, right? Or maybe someday you can even imagine getting a Turing Award. So if the reward system that we had was just to reach that top, that I don't think would be a very effective way of motivating us. We need all these intermediate steps as well. So where does that leave us?
This is pretty so structured data, but that's not enough. Opportunities to explore, but maybe that's not enough. Teaching, but maybe even that's not enough. Non-stationary rewards. It seems like you need the right experience at the right time to kind of develop intelligent behavior.
So if we wanted a slogan, maybe it could be this: what you need when you need it is all you need.